You don't belong here, you. Move out now, or you will regret wasting my time.
Officer Garrett Vance's voice, thick with an arrogance honed by 12 years patrolling Harmony Creek, sliced through the quiet, pine-scented December air. Vance felt a familiar, self-assured certainty bubble up inside him. 12 years on the force had taught him to trust his instincts, the very ones that had successfully pinned minor charges on countless individuals he deemed suspicious people who, in his prejudiced mind, simply didn't belong in the pristine, official spaces of the county courthouse. This morning, his sights were set on a quiet African-American woman, sitting near the restricted staff entrance. She was dressed in simple, though clean, attire, a heavy, worn wool coat and slacks, nursing a travel mug. He saw not a woman waiting, but a threat to his carefully maintained order. This was not a person with legitimate business. This was someone trying to game the system, and his seasoned experience, his internal voice of authority, screamed that he was right. He had already dealt with her type before, those who show superficial respect while harboring deceit. This certainty fueled his aggressive approach, his boots thudding heavily on the cold marble floor, his uniform a declaration of unquestioned power. He felt obligated to wield against her quiet defiance. He didn't ask what she needed. He launched straight into accusation, wanting to stamp out the intrusion before it could even breathe. But those same trusted instincts, fueled by personal prejudice rather than true evidence, were lying to him today. Unexpected, the quiet woman he was treating like a common loiterer, the one he was about to humiliate with a citation, was actually the newly appointed judge of this very county courthouse. This is it. His rash judgment based on skin color and attire would cost him his entire career and bring a spotlight of shame onto the small town he vowed to protect. Ellie Hayes, calm and centered, did not immediately look up, but her internal focus shifted entirely to the hostile presence of the officer. She had chosen her simple attire precisely to observe the courthouse environment without drawing undue attention before her official swearing-in ceremony scheduled for later that afternoon. Her objective was to wait patiently for Chief Judge Sterling, savoring these last moments of relative anonymity before her professional life became public. The aggressive energy emanating from Officer Vance, however, was an immediate and profound disappointment, a stark reminder of the exact societal issues she had chosen to return to this small North Carolina town to challenge and change from within. Vance, interpreting her composed delay as passive defiance or outright disrespect, grew visibly angrier. He planted his feet wide and demanded, his voice escalating with each word. "I asked you what your business is here. This is a restricted area. Who are you meeting? And why are you dressed like you're waiting for a bus out of town?" His tone was designed not to inform, but to intimidate, to provoke a reaction that would justify the immediate, prejudiced assumptions he had already made about her character and intentions. Ellie finally raised her gaze, her eyes steady, warm, and disconcertingly intelligent. She spoke politely, her voice quiet but clear, carrying a subtle legal authority that Vance was too blinded by his own bias to detect. "Good morning, officer. I am waiting for Chief Judge Sterling. He is expecting me." Her response was reasonable, yet it only fueled Vance's instant, cynical dismissal. He scoffed, a loud, derisive sound that bounced off the high marble walls, accusing her of fabricating a story to get out of trouble, and suggesting she was attempting to exploit the kindness of the judicial system. "Sterling? The Chief Judge? You expect me to believe that fairy tale? The Chief Judge doesn't conduct important meetings in the staff hall, especially not with people who look like they're waiting for a free meal, not a legal consultation." His blatant insinuation, thick with obvious class and racial prejudice, was deeply disheartening, but Ellie maintained her composure, refusing to give him the emotional escalation he desperately sought. She attempted a simple final de-escalation, calmly suggesting that he call the Chief Judge's secretary to verify her statement. Vance rejected the idea out of hand, his ego demanding immediate, unquestioning compliance. He insisted she move to the public waiting area immediately, threatening her with a citation for trespassing if she delayed another second. The confrontation had spiraled beyond a simple matter of a rule. It was now a stark, ugly contest over Vance's unquestioned authority being challenged by a woman he had already judged and dismissed as beneath him. His resentment against her quiet control was mounting to a dangerous level, making his desire to assert his power overwhelming. Vance's mounting frustration had fully eroded the last sliver of his professional restraint. He moved decisively from verbal threats to raw physical intimidation, desperate to regain the upper hand and enforce his perceived order. "That's enough of your lawyer games. You're moving now," he insisted, reaching out with impatience and grabbing Ellie's forearm roughly, attempting to physically steer her away from the bench toward the general public waiting area. The unexpected, forceful contact, an undeniable violation of her personal space and his police conduct, sent a sharp jolt through Ellie. Though surprised by his rashness, she kept her reaction internalized, refusing to give him the explosive, emotional response he clearly sought to justify his actions. She pulled her arm back gently but firmly, her eyes meeting his with a controlled intensity that was both surprising and intensely frustrating to the officer. "Officer, I advise you to check your records and your demeanor. Please don't touch me," she stated, her voice dropping slightly, now laced with an undeniable layer of warning. She spoke not just as a civilian being accosted, but as someone who understood the precise legal and professional implications of his escalating actions. Vance only laughed mockingly at her quiet defiance. Her composed warning sounded in his prejudiced ears like a final, pathetic attempt to escape inevitable consequence. He dismissed her calm advice instantly, convinced she was bluffing or simply trying to stall for time. He saw only a woman who refused to obey, confirming every negative assumption he had originally made. With a triumphant sense of entitlement and a desire to formalize her humiliation, he stepped back, reaching for his ticket book that was clipped to his belt. This confrontation was now going to be official. She had earned her punishment, and he would deliver the citation personally and smugly. He had absolutely no way of knowing that the simple ticket he was about to issue was, metaphorically, the very instrument of his own undoing. The ominous threat of his impending disciplinary action loomed large in the empty, silent hall, a conflict ignited solely by his prejudice and now fueled to a reckless level by his own unchecked arrogance. Vance snarls, "A warning wasn't enough, was it? Looks like you're earning yourself a citation right here. I suggest you start getting used to this courthouse, but from the other side of the bar." Vance stood over Ellie, savoring the small victory that issuing the ticket represented. He was obsessed with winning the argument, his ego demanding proof that his initial, prejudiced judgment had been correct. He took his time filling out the citation, his pen scratching loudly against the paper in the tense silence. He deliberately wrote down the charge, loitering and failure to comply with an officer's lawful order in a restricted area. The charge itself was flimsy, but Vance knew the local magistrate would likely rubber stamp it, especially since the person cited was someone he had already mentally classified as a troublemaker. The early morning light was beginning to filter into the lobby, casting long, dramatic shadows that seemed to emphasize the isolation of the confrontation. A few early legal assistants and clerks were starting to arrive, entering through a separate door, and they quickly averted their gaze, unwilling to involve themselves in the clear display of police aggression. This public avoidance only emboldened Vance. Silence often meant consent to him. As he wrote, he made a condescending remark to Ellie, his voice low and cutting. "You know," he sneered, "it's always the same. People like you think the law doesn't apply to them until they get a little taste of reality. Maybe a day in court will teach you a little bit about respect for authority and for people who actually serve this community, not just cause trouble." His veiled threat, hinting that her type needed to learn their place, was a final verbal attack meant to make her feel small and powerless. Ellie Hayes maintained her composure, her silence mirroring the control she was exerting over the situation. She knew that any emotional outburst would only play directly into his hands. Her quiet dignity was her strength, signaling that she was observing and assessing him, not just reacting to his bullying, a subtle hint that her composure was rooted in something far deeper than mere nervousness. Ellie Hayes received Vance's escalating verbal abuse with a disconcerting and deep composure, maintaining eye contact, but her expression subtly shifted from calm attention to one of profound pity and disappointment. This unexpected reaction, this look of quiet judgment that suggested he was the one truly out of control, infuriated Vance far more than if she had argued. It was a silent challenge to his authority, one he couldn't legally cite. He wanted her to show the anger, the aggression he expected from her type, but she simply observed him. This quiet resilience was the essence of her strength, the internal power he couldn't possibly understand. He glowered, ready to unleash another threat, when Ellie Hayes did something entirely unexpected. Her voice remained low, calm, and conversational, yet every word landed with the precise weight of an official filing. She ignored his personal insults and instead countered with a question that immediately shut down his smug sense of victory. "Has anyone ever advised you to review your file, Officer Vance? Specifically, the notations regarding unprofessional conduct from last July?" The sudden, specific reference to his internal disciplinary record acted like a physical blow. Vance froze, the smug smirk instantly vanishing from his face, replaced by a mask of stunned, cold fear. The July incident had been a reprimand for a similar, prejudiced escalation during a traffic stop, where he had been aggressive with a family of color. It had been swept mostly under the rug, but the notation was real, a blot on his perfect service record, and it was confidential internal knowledge. How could this woman, this loiterer he just cited, possibly know that detail? The shock wasn't just that she knew, but that she could use it so calmly, exposing his history of bias for the internal abuse it was. His ego, previously soaring, crashed to the hard marble floor. He was momentarily speechless, his mind racing to find a logical explanation. She had just revealed that she wasn't merely a quiet civilian. She was someone with access, knowledge, or perhaps a legal mind that rivaled his superiors. This subtle yet powerful maneuver exposed his underlying fragility and his history of misconduct, instantly solidifying the audience's emotional investment in Ellie's eventual triumph and increasing their desire for true justice against a pattern of abuse, not just a single incident. This single calm question served as the climax of the chapter, definitively exposing the officer's pattern of misconduct and confirming that his current aggression was fueled by prejudice, not protocol. Officer Vance was left momentarily stunned, the composure of his authority shattered by Ellie's precise, confidential knowledge of his past misconduct. His ego, however, quickly began to scramble for a rationalization, refusing to accept that this woman could truly be his intellectual or professional superior. His eyes darted around the quiet lobby, seeking a distraction or an affirmation of his power. Just then, an elderly man, Mr. Jenkins, the courthouse janitor, slowly wheeled his cleaning cart near the scene. Mr. Jenkins, an African-American man who had worked in Harmony Creek for decades, had seen Vance's abrasive behavior many times. He was sweeping discreetly, but his eyes, filled with weariness and a subtle communal fear, briefly met Ellie's. He offered a quick, concerned nod, a silent, nonverbal acknowledgement of the injustice and the shared experience of prejudice before quickly averting his gaze, too intimidated to intervene directly against the armed officer. Vance, regaining his arrogant posture, dismissed the janitor with a rude, dismissive wave, a gesture that signaled he believed Jenkins was beneath notice and that his bullying behavior was fully justified because he had an audience who wouldn't dare challenge him. This public display of disrespect against a quiet, hard-working community elder only solidified the audience's growing resentment toward Vance. Ellie accepted the citation Vance had finally pushed toward her. She took the ticket without a word of protest, folding the flimsy paper neatly and slowly tucking it into the pocket of her wool coat. She looked directly into Vance's still furious eyes, her expression shifting slightly from pity to a quiet, almost sad determination. She leaned in just enough for her voice to carry, whispering a final, cryptic warning meant only for him to hear. "This is a town named Harmony, officer. Sometimes the person you scorn is the very key to your own survival." Her message was not a threat of revenge, but a somber statement of moral consequence and fate. Vance watched Ellie turn and walk with quiet, unwavering dignity to the public waiting bench, triumphantly believing he had won the exchange and restored his dominance. He scoffed aloud, adjusting his belt and smoothing his uniform, utterly convinced of his victory. Survival? She thinks she's some kind of hero. This whole day is going to be quiet, just like I like it. Officer Vance was still simmering from the subtle but devastating way Ellie Hayes had exposed his past misconduct in the previous exchange. He felt personally violated that she, a woman he had judged instantly, possessed confidential knowledge that could threaten his career. His triumph over issuing the ticket felt hollow, and his need to reassert absolute dominance became an unhealthy obsession. He watched Ellie walk to the public bench and carefully open her worn leather briefcase, preparing to pass the time by reviewing her notes. Vance couldn't let it go. He paced the restricted hallway, his rage boiling beneath the surface of his pressed uniform, determined to have the last, most painful word. He walked past Ellie one final time, stopping just close enough to deliver the cruelest, most cutting parting shot he could muster. His voice was a low, vicious snarl, carefully calculated to crush her spirit completely. You know, I don't know who you think you are, but you're not fooling anyone. Harmony Creek has enough lost causes, and we certainly don't need outsiders creating trouble. He leaned in slightly, his expression one of pure, unrestrained contempt. You really look like you belong back on the bus out of town, lady. If you want respect, maybe try earning it, starting with a decent change of clothes and a real job. This final barrage of insults, aimed directly at her appearance and perceived lack of social status, was designed to humiliate her utterly. Ellie stopped organizing her papers, her hands resting on the edge of her briefcase. Her silence, however, was not defeat. It was a heavy, profound disappointment, showing that his words, while failing to break her, had confirmed the depths of his ugly prejudice. This explicit, final verbal attack pushed the audience's outrage to its absolute peak, leaving them desperate for the justice that was about to be served. Fueled entirely by his own blazing insecurity and a fierce need to wipe the quiet, judging pity from Ellie Hayes' face, Officer Vance knew words were no longer enough. His rage demanded a tangible, visible act of humiliation. He saw her worn leather briefcase, a simple object that nonetheless symbolized her professionalism and the world he felt was unfairly denying him respect. The briefcase, containing her new judge's robes and official appointment documents, was sitting right beside her. In a moment of pure, blinding arrogance, Vance lashed out. He took his foot and, with a powerful, aggressive shove, kicked the briefcase across the marble floor. The heavy leather skidded violently, hitting the wall with a loud, sickening thud that echoed through the quiet space. Papers, legal notes, and personal items scattered across the cold floor. The sound was brutal, shocking, and entirely unnecessary. Vance immediately followed this thuggish action with a shout designed to break her spirit completely. "Pick up your garbage and get out of my courthouse. You're done here." The sheer disrespect, the use of physical force against an object symbolizing a woman's professional life, and the public demand for her to grovel, pushed the emotional climax to its absolute peak. Ellie, stunned by the sudden, low-level violence, knelt slowly to begin gathering her scattered belongings, her face a mixture of pain and profound, quiet disappointment, refusing to look up at her aggressor. This explicit act of bullying, witnessed by the audience, fulfilled the final requirement for maximum outrage before the inevitable twist. Vance stood over Ellie, gloating over the mess he had created, the papers and legal briefs scattered around the woman who was kneeling on the cold marble floor. His chest heaved with a combination of lingering fury and the perverse satisfaction of having finally enforced his will and dominance. He was entirely focused on her humiliation, unaware that the universe was about to deliver its swift, brutal judgment upon him. Just as he was about to deliver one final triumphant sneer, the heavy, ornate oak door to the Chief Judge's chambers opened. Chief Judge Harold Sterling, an imposing man in his 70s, respected and feared across the entire county, stepped out into the hallway. The Chief Judge stopped dead in his tracks. He took in the entire scene in one devastating moment. The arrogant young officer towering aggressively over a woman, The scattered papers, the look of quiet resignation on the woman's face. The silence that followed was thick with palpable authority and profound disappointment. Chief Judge Sterling's eyes narrowed instantly, focused entirely on Vance, his fury controlled but unmistakable. His voice, usually warm and folksy, was now sharp, cold, and booming with absolute authority, cutting through the tense atmosphere like a shard of ice. He didn't address the woman first. His first words were for the officer who had so publicly betrayed the decorum of the court. He took 2 deliberate steps toward Vance, his voice laced with controlled rage, finally breaking the agonizing silence. "Officer Vance, what in the devil's name is the meaning of this spectacle? And Judge Hayes, I apologize profusely. I didn't realize you had already arrived." Vance froze instantly, his posture collapsing from aggressive dominance to rigid, terrified shock. The single word "judge" echoed in the vast lobby, destroying his reality and freezing him in place, the man he was expected to be, standing still. Officer Garrett Vance was no longer an officer. He was a statue of pure, frozen panic. The single word "judge" echoing from Chief Judge Sterling's lips had shattered his reality, forcing him to confront the agonizing realization that the woman he had just verbally abused, physically intimidated, and publicly humiliated was not a loiterer, but his direct authority, the very embodiment of the law he was meant to serve. He remained rigidly standing still, unable to move a muscle, his mind struggling to reconcile the plain woman in the simple wool coat with the profound, undeniable power of the judicial title. The chief judge, his face a mask of deep, controlled fury and acute embarrassment, dismissed the few gathering clerks with a firm wave before turning his full, authoritative attention back to the devastating scene. Sterling's voice, though lowered slightly, resonated with formal displeasure as he stepped forward and extended his hand to Ellie Hayes, completely ignoring Vance's petrified presence. "Judge Hayes," Sterling pronounced, ensuring his full title was used, "I apologize profusely for this unacceptable, outrageous reception. Allow me to formally introduce Judge Elena Hayes, our new addition to the county bench, recently transferred from the appellate court, ready to begin her work in the pursuit of justice." The emphasis on her qualifications and the significance of her new role was a calculated, deliberate hammer blow to Vance's crumbling ego. Vance could only stare, his eyes wide with disbelief, the blood completely draining from his face. The woman he categorized as trash was now the superior legal mind who could, with a simple signature, end his entire career. His total, absolute stillness was the defining image, a psychological meltdown witnessed by the audience, marking the immediate reversal of power. He couldn't speak, couldn't run, couldn't even blink away the horrifying truth. Judge Hayes, accepting the chief judge's hand with grace, finally rose fully to her feet. She took a deep, steadying breath, her professional posture instantly returning, replacing the image of the woman on her knees. The power dynamic in the hallway shifted completely, the atmosphere now dominated by her quiet, unshakable authority. Her first action was to ignore the chief judge and focus entirely on the petrified figure of Officer Vance. She slowly smoothed the folds of her wool coat and walked deliberately toward the paralyzed officer. Reaching into her pocket, she retrieved the crumpled citation Vance had issued to her barely an hour earlier, the paper evidence of his prejudice. She held the ticket up, her gaze meeting Vance's terrified eyes, which were darting desperately around the hallway. She spoke, not shouting, but with a calm, penetrating authority that was far more devastating than any scream. "Officer Vance, you should know better than to judge a person's worth by their coat or by their skin." Her voice was measured, utterly controlled, yet it carried the weight of every past indignity she had faced, delivered now with the full, final authority of her title. She paused, letting the statement sink in, allowing Vance to fully understand the gravity of his mistake. She then briefly flicked her eyes toward the scattered papers still lying near the wall and referenced his ticket. "You gave me this citation for loitering, and you chose to physically assault my property because you believed I didn't respect this courthouse." The sheer, effortless control in her voice crushed his arrogance completely. This was the precise moment of catharsis the audience desired. The woman who had been humiliated by raw power was now using quiet, legitimate power to hold her aggressor accountable, turning the tables with devastating elegance. The confrontation had reached its boiling point, and the consequences arrived immediately. Judge Hayes took a single controlled step back, having delivered her verdict on his character. Chief Judge Sterling stepped forward, his expression severe, recognizing that the situation required an instant, public response to restore the authority of the court. He ignored Vance's terrified, stammering attempts to apologize or explain, knowing any words would be hollow. Sterling addressed Vance with a low, chilling command that left no room for appeal. "Officer Vance, you are to leave this building immediately. Report directly to Chief Anderson at the station. Consider yourself placed on immediate administrative leave, pending a full review and disposition from Judge Hayes." The sentence was sharp, official, and utterly final, severing Vance's authority and removing him from the premises. He had lost everything in the span of 5 minutes. Vance, pale and visibly trembling, his aggressive posture completely broken, mumbled an inaudible reply, dropped his coffee mug, and stumbled backward, turning to flee the building in panicked haste. His rapid departure served as the final, visual confirmation of the power reversal. As Vance disappeared, Chief Judge Sterling turned to Judge Hayes, the severity in his eyes softening into sincere respect. He offered a visible, profound apology for the conduct of his officer, acknowledging the deep professional and personal offense she had endured. Judge Hayes accepted his apology with a calm nod, but her focus remained on the path forward. She looked down at the spot where her briefcase had fallen, a subtle, lingering reminder that despite her ultimate power, the disrespect and prejudice had been profoundly real. She turned back to Judge Sterling, her voice firm and decisive. "Harold, before we discuss my chambers, we need to discuss a path forward for Officer Vance." In the late afternoon, Judge Hayes sat in her temporary, sparsely decorated office, facing Chief Judge Sterling and Police Chief Anderson, a stoic man who had arrived immediately after Vance was ejected. The atmosphere was solemn and professional, the two chiefs keenly aware of the gravity of Vance's actions, especially the physical violation and the public humiliation of a newly appointed judge, were united in their recommendation. Chief Anderson stated flatly, "Judge Hayes, with his history and today's display, we recommend immediate termination. It's the only way to send a clear message." Chief Sterling concurred, noting that Vance's misconduct would be easily justifiable grounds for dismissal, especially given the clear racial animus. Judge Hayes listened patiently, her fingers steepled beneath her chin, before shaking her head slightly. She acknowledged the validity of their legal position, but gently explained her moral perspective. "Termination is the easy route, chiefs, but it's purely punitive. It doesn't correct the cause. It just discards the person." She paused, her voice softening as she recalled a crucial memory from her past, a personal story that deeply informed her current decision. She recounted how, early in her career, struggling against immense prejudice in a competitive city firm, she had nearly been dismissed over a minor error. However, an elderly white male mentor, a man named Mr. Peterson, had intervened. He didn't just overlook the error, he invested time in teaching her, showing her immense grace and a second chance despite the prevailing negative opinions about her potential. "Mr. Peterson taught me that true strength isn't punishing weakness. It's cultivating potential," she explained, her eyes fixed on the chiefs. "If I demand justice for myself, I must also be willing to show mercy when it is deserved, even if it's merely the potential for a better man beneath the uniform. I cannot ask for justice if I am unwilling to show mercy when it is deserved." Her quiet resolve and the unexpected personal story effectively disarmed the chief's punitive stance. Having set the moral groundwork, Judge Hayes moved from philosophy to precise judicial action. She fixed her gaze on Police Chief Anderson and delivered her final decision regarding Officer Vance. "My ruling is not termination. I believe in the possibility of correction over simple punishment." Her announcement visibly surprised the two seasoned chiefs, who exchanged quick, skeptical glances, expecting the hammer to drop. Hayes continued, her voice firm and non-negotiable. "Officer Vance will serve an immediate 6-month unpaid suspension from the force. This is non-negotiable disciplinary action for gross misconduct. However, the suspension was paired with a court-mandated program designed explicitly for moral and societal correction. During this time, she declared, he is required to complete 100 hours of community service, and this service must be performed at the Veterans Community Kitchen here in Harmony Creek. He will be assisting the most deserving and often overlooked members of our community, our elderly veterans. This choice was deliberate. She wanted Vance to be forced to interact respectfully with people he might typically ignore or dismiss, including older community members who shared the audience's demographic. Furthermore, she added a mandatory educational component. He will also attend mandatory weekly anti-bias training sessions run by a third-party consultant specializing in implicit prejudice. The goal of this judgment, Chiefs, Judge Hayes summarized her authority unwavering, is not to ruin a career, but to rebuild a man. I am demanding accountability through education, not retribution. Mike sure in this creative, redemptive sentence, community service, and intensive bias training instead of termination was the climax of mercy, emphasizing rehabilitation and growth, cementing her standard of justice for Harmony Creek. Meanwhile, across town, Officer Vance sat at home, suspended and isolated, expecting the worst. He had spent the afternoon consumed by a suffocating dread, certain that the consequences of his arrogance and prejudice would be swift and total. The end of his career, financial ruin, and public disgrace. The doorbell rang sharply, and it was Police Chief Anderson himself delivering the official paperwork detailing Judge Hayes' ruling. Vance took the thick envelope, his hands clammy, his heart pounding. He opened it, preparing to read the formal notice of termination, the final crushing blow to his future. But as he scanned the documents, a deep, overwhelming shock replaced his dread. He read the verdict again. Unpaid suspension, community service, bias training. He was not fired. Judge Hayes, the woman he had verbally abused, the woman whose property he had kicked across the floor, had chosen to spare him. The shock of being spared hit him harder than any disciplinary action possibly could have. If he had been fired, he could have played the victim, blamed the system, or claimed reverse discrimination. But with this act of grace, he had no one to blame but himself, and he was forced to confront the magnitude of the judge's undeserved kindness. He stood before his bathroom mirror, staring at his reflection, the arrogant swagger gone. This was the first sign of genuine shame and guilt he had felt. Not for getting caught, but for realizing the depth of the wrong he had inflicted upon a person who was ultimately his superior in power and morality. Back at the courthouse, Chief Judge Sterling looked at the newly arrived Judge Hayes with immense respect. His initial skepticism completely dissolved. Judge Hayes, that is the most humane judgment I have witnessed in 30 years on the bench. You have set a new standard for justice in Harmony Creek. Judge Hayes smiled faintly, her resolve clear. The standard isn't mine, Harold. It's the standard of what kind of community we choose to be. The cold, isolated world of the county courthouse in December was now a distant memory, replaced by the warm, sunlit reality of early June. The 6-month suspension had felt like an eternity to Officer Garrett Vance, but it had been a mandatory sentence of deep self-reflection. His most painful, yet ultimately formative task was fulfilling his community service at the Veterans Community Kitchen. On a particularly warm afternoon, Judge Elena Hayes, now fully integrated and respected in her judicial role, made an unannounced visit to the kitchen. She walked in quietly, observing the busy, kind atmosphere where food and companionship were served to those who needed it most. She immediately spotted Vance. He was not just fulfilling hours, he was working hard, stripped of his uniform, wearing only a plain apron, smiling genuinely as he helped an elderly, decorated veteran navigate the serving line. He spoke to everyone with patience and deference, a stark contrast to the snarling aggression he had displayed that fateful December morning. Most importantly, Judge Hayes saw Mr. Jenkins, the elderly janitor who had witnessed Vance's outburst in the courthouse, volunteering nearby. Mr. Jenkins, now visibly comfortable around Vance, offered a kind nod and a friendly comment to the former officer, a clear sign that the community had noticed and accepted his genuine efforts toward change. This visual evidence of Vance's humility, the social repair between him and the community, and the respectful engagement with the elderly veterans confirmed for Judge Hayes that her sentence of grace was working exactly as intended. The icy shell of prejudice had finally cracked, allowing a glimmer of decency to emerge. Judge Hayes, standing quietly and observing the profound shift in Vance's demeanor, did not need to initiate the conversation. Vance, who was wiping down a dining table, looked up and recognized the judge standing near the threshold. He stopped his work immediately, his heart no longer pounding with fear, but with an entirely new emotion, genuine remorse. He put the cleaning cloth down, unconsciously straightening his apron, and walked toward her, completely devoid of the arrogance he once wore like a second skin. He stood before her, not as an officer or a disciplined employee, but as a humbled man. Tears welled up in his eyes, not from anger or wounded pride, but from the raw shame of his past behavior. His voice was thick with emotion, low but filled with sincerity. Judge Hayes, I am truly sorry. I apologize for everything I said and did to you 6 months ago. I was completely wrong. He added that he had received far more than a punishment. He had received a vital lesson. Working here, serving the most deserving people in this community, has taught me more about respect and kindness than 1,000 hours of police training ever could. You had every reason to ruin my career, but instead you gave me a chance to become a better man. Thank you, Judge. Judge Hayes listened to his entire confession in appreciation, never interrupting. Finally, she accepted his apology with a warm, genuine smile, looking straight into his eyes. She took no pleasure in his distress, but found deep satisfaction in his transformation. This was the climax of altruism. The cycle of redemption was complete. Out of the three, Judge Hayes listened to Vance's heartfelt apology, sensing the true transformation in his voice and spirit. She carried no air of triumph or pride. Instead, there was a profound sense of satisfaction. She accepted his apology, not because he was an officer, but because he had finally found his humility. I accept your apology, Officer Vance, Judge Hayes said, using his official title again, marking his path back to active service. She made her official declaration. Your order of suspension has officially been lifted. You may return to duty. However, she attached a condition that was not based on law, but on morality. You are not just going back to work. You are going back to be the officer Harmony Creek deserves. You have learned the most important lesson about true service and respect. Never forget it. Vance nodded, his eyes still red, but now filled with determination. He understood his job was not to police or discriminate, but to protect everyone equally. The narrative concludes with the visual resolution of the emotional conflict. Officer Vance was later seen back in his uniform, patrolling a busy corner of the town square. He gently bent down, offering a patient and polite smile as he helped an elderly, slow-moving person safely cross the street, demonstrating the very kind of non-prejudiced, respectful service he had vowed to embody. The closing message to the audience. The story of Officer Vance and Judge Hayes teaches us a timeless truth. Officer Vance learned that the woman he judged by her coat and her skin was the only one capable of saving him. Harmony Creek learned that justice is not just about punishment, but about the profound power of a second chance. Never judge a book by its cover. And so the quiet dignity of one woman, Judge Elena Hayes, proved far more powerful than the loudest prejudice of an officer. What started in the cold, hard marble of the Harmony Creek Courthouse with a rash act of judgment ended 6 months later in the warmth of true service and forgiveness. This story reminds us that the badges of authority, whether worn on a uniform or earned through high office, mean little without the badge of kindness in our hearts. May we all remember to look past the surface, past the coat, past the color, past the assumption, for often the grace we extend to others is the very justice we receive ourselves.